That's right. Yeah, that speech gave us a lot of interesting statements from the former president. And the thing to notice, though, with the former president versus Joe Biden is that most Americans don't actually aren't that concerned about Donald Trump. When you talk about Donald Trump to most Americans who are voting against him, age is really not one of the top issues. Whereas if you look at Joe Biden, if you look at the number one concern for people for Joe Biden, both those voting for him and those voting against him, age is a top concern. But we'll see if this goes into sort of the sort of opposition folder for those not wanting to see President Trump return to office. But I think in reality, there are a lot more concerns amongst those against the former president than just age.
Yeah, indeed. And if you look at it, there's not that much of an age gap between them. But when you look at Washington and the political landscape, you've got Mitch McConnell, who's had a couple of episodes where he does not look very well at all. Nancy Pelosi at 83 seeking re-election. Has there ever been any thought to age limits on political players?
There is some talk about that. If anything, the most extensive sort of conversation about limits would be term limits. And that really is somewhat based on age, but really just based on time in office. So as we know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected 4 times in office. And after that, they got a new amendment to the Constitution that outlawed any U.S. president afterwards from having more than 2 terms of office. There's a lot of discussion about those in the Senate or those in the House having term limits. But the last time that really had substantial progress was during the 90s. And then, unsurprisingly, those who ran on that campaign got into office and didn't really pursue it very much.
Yeah, indeed. It's sort of political self-interest there. Let's talk. I mean, there have been so many issues that have been thrown up with Donald Trump. He did an extensive interview talking about the election, once again claiming, of course, the election was stolen from him. He keeps on making comments that are not necessarily going to help his own court case.
That's right. I think if you look at the way the former president has conducted himself, I don't think anyone would say he makes life easy for his lawyers. With that said, he has a pretty good track record of escaping legal ramifications for his sort of open-minded approach to commenting on existing and ongoing court cases. You can see in that interview, as well as in other interviews elsewhere, that he is very open about his views about what happened in the election. He really has not changed who he was when he came on the scene in 2015, when he went down that escalator, which he talked about in that interview, and how the media has been unfair to him. But in reality, I think he is the same guy he's always been, and he will continue to be that regardless of the legal ramifications.
Yeah, and it's interesting to keep giving him those platforms where he, even if you're trying to fact check, he just continues to lie and lie and lie.
Yeah, you can see that the media has sort of taken a different approach to the way they engage with him. I think Australia's own Jonathan Swan, in many ways, pioneered that sort of interviewing of the former president when he was in office, when he was President Trump at the time. And he really pushed back and was willing to interrupt. Before Donald Trump came on the scene, it was sort of convention that you would never interrupt a president, let alone a sitting president, let alone, as well as a former president. And what you're seeing now is that interviewer on NBC, on Meet the Press, she went out of her way to not give the former president the oxygen to come back, to change the subject. She came prepared, she came with the facts so that she could very clearly and articulately push back against every falsehood that she believed him to make.
Yeah, interesting. It is interesting, too, that abortion continues to prove a tricky issue for Republicans, Trump appearing not to back some of the extreme restrictions placed on it in some of the Republican and conservative states. How do you think this is going to play out for the Republicans at the moment? They all seem to be taking different positions.
That's right. So Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, I think in many ways, have both pivoted more to the center on abortion. Abortion in America is famously divisive, and it has been for many decades. With that said, there is some general consensus that Americans don't like late-term abortions, but are open to earlier abortions. And as the former president said very clearly, you have to find that threshold that is sort of acceptable to both sides, or more acceptable than not. And I think that's why he went out of his way to say that he'll just get people to the table. He did not put a specific date, a specific time frame for where he would draw the line. Instead, he portrayed himself as the ultimate deal maker, as someone who can really bring all the sides to the table and end up with an outcome that everyone will be happy with. With that said, I don't think that's very likely that everyone will be happy. But in reality, he sort of created where he is today, because he helped nominate 3 Supreme Court justices to the Supreme Court who then overturned Roe v. Wade. They overturned the constitutional right to an abortion for the first time in decades, since the 1970s. And so we're now living in the world that he helped create, which he said he did, and he was proud of that. But in terms of where you draw the line, now that individual U.S. states can determine where that line is and how they're changing things, I think he sees that as bad politics.
Yeah.
And as a result, that's why he was criticizing Ron DeSantis and the earlier limitations.
Yeah, so he might go a different tack when it gets closer to the election. Just briefly, how do you think Hunter Biden's indictment is now going to impact Joe Biden's re-election chances?
Yeah, what you're seeing with Hunter Biden is, I think, what some in the Trump orbit would call flooding the zone. And this is where you try to bring out as much dirt as you can on the opposing candidate, so you can say, all right, you can say whatever you want about my candidate, but look at all the dirt on your candidate. Now, what's interesting about this one is that you don't have Democrats in Congress saying that Jared Kushner is separate from President Trump, in the way that you do have Republicans in Congress saying that Hunter Biden is separate from Joe Biden. You have Ken Buck, a Republican from Colorado, who he came out with an op-ed on this issue, saying this is not worth impeaching Joe Biden yet. I mean, there's an impeachment inquiry on what Joe Biden has done, especially in regards to Hunter Biden, but we're still early days. And one of the reasons why we're not seeing wall-to-wall coverage of this impeachment inquiry is that most can see the reality that, in many ways, the Speaker of the Republican leader in Congress, Kevin McCarthy, really felt like he had no alternative but to start this inquiry. We're still a long ways away from the 2 impeachments that we saw during the Trump administration.
Indeed. Good to get you on as always, Jared. Thanks so much.
Thank you.